Like Stephanie mentioned, this is intended to be a very interactive session. I really want to speak with you about what you hope to get out of this session, and speak to that directly. I have my own intentions in terms of what I can communicate about interpersonal communications and different tips and things like that. But the real benefit of this session is the opportunity to speak with me directly about some of the challenges you may be having inside of your own communications, whether that's in a business setting, in a workplace setting, in like interpersonal setting, like trying to build relationships and network. I have a lot of experience as a communications professional, which I will dive into, but really I'm gonna have a lot of pauses. My presentation is relatively short. I'm gonna have a lot of pauses in between to address questions that you might have, and I'm gonna ask a lot of questions of you. And I hope that we can have this space together to learn about each other, and for me to really impart something on you over the course of this next hour and a bit. Okay, so. Before I get started, does anyone have any questions? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We have actually quite a few people on tonight, especially considering it is an evening time. I didn't know what to expect, so this is a nice, a pleasant surprise. Uh, okay. Everybody can see my screen and can see the right screen? Okay, great. Okay, so interpersonal communications. Like I mentioned, I didn't quite know what to expect. I know that the BUPA deals with a wide range of folks from the Black community, from businesses to individuals who are working full time to students. So I really tried to keep this relatively general. And like I mentioned, I want to engage with you personally and directly about some of the communication challenges that you may be facing, or some of the tips that you want to get directly. Um, so before we get started, I just want to dive into a little bit of introductions, talk a little bit about myself, and maybe learn a little bit more about you. So like Stephanie mentioned, I run a communications agency, Trotman Communications. It's a strategic communications agency that provides targeted communication support to community healthcare organizations. We work broadly within the not-for-profit sector, but really our area of specialization and my own area of interest is in community healthcare. I've worked with a number of different community health centers across the city and across Ontario. And I'm actually also a partner of Calabash, which is a collective of Black consultants across Canada, working with not-for-profit organizations on different issues that impact them and impact our community. I wear a bunch of different hats, but in general, they all connect back to communications in some way. I'm a director of stakeholder engagement for Trinity Centers Foundation. I'm a senior communications advisor with Partners Community Health. I was a sessional professor with Seneca College, teaching corporate communications to university grads. So I've been steeped in communications for a very long time. And, speaking quite frankly, and, we're a room of friends, so I think I can speak quite frankly here. Um, I would credit effective communications to a lot of the opportunities that I've been fortunate enough to take part in over the course of my life. And I think that starts at home. I think my mom was very intent on teaching me and my sisters about effective communications. She worked at North York General Hospital as a volunteer coordinator, and had to interact with a number of different people from a number of different walks of life. And she saw the value of effective communications and what it could do for you. And in speaking with people, like, and again, speaking quite frankly, folks wouldn't know where I'm from. Like, I don't have an accent. My name is Christopher Trotman. I could be from anywhere in the world, right? And as a result, there is no sort of bias against me, but also the way I speak. Like, even if I don't have an accent, if I don't know how to present myself professionally, then those opportunities still wouldn't come my way. So that's not to say that folks should change their name or be ashamed of their accents. We live in a multicultural country where people speak all sorts of different ways. It is to say there's a lot of benefit in knowing how to leverage your communication skills, whether that's written or verbal, or how you present yourself, so that people feel a level of trust and comfort, and are able to trust you with their businesses, with the jobs that they're presenting, with the different relationships that they might present to you. There's a lot of benefit in learning how to leverage communications effectively, and I'm hoping that we can dive into that in a lot of detail today. Before I dig into it, like I mentioned, I want to learn more about all of you. So maybe if folks could just unmute themselves and just kind of shout out an answer, but what are you hoping to get out of tonight's session? What are you hoping to learn? Why did you join this session tonight? And I'll just wait for a few folks to just either share in the chat, or feel free to type in the chat, or ideally just unmute yourself so we can talk about it a little bit. But what had you join the session tonight? What attracted you to this topic?
Personally, let me take a go at it. So personally, I joined because being that we will be connecting virtually, I thought it would be a good opportunity to actually practice my communication amongst new faces that I never met before and see how well can I portray or bring across my points in helping my confidence going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. I appreciate you sharing.
For sure.
Anyone else?
We have a comment from Carrie in the chat. She has indicated that she's not feeling very well this evening. Carrie has said she wanted to see if this topic could help benefit her business. Grace has also responded saying, I joined this session to gain more communication skills and training. I have experience being an administrative assistant, currently running my own business, and being a digital marketing and communications coordinator.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Carrie and Grace. Appreciate it. Anyone else?
For me, I'm hoping to learn how to get out of my comfort zone when it comes to developing my career path, and also like in terms of being able to contribute more, like what's the best way to like communicate within my work environment. And also hopefully learning good communication skills, like networking skills, that could help with my business or entrepreneurship in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. And sorry, I can't see is it Krista who was speaking?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Krista.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. I'll take one more person. I joined because I want to learn how to communicate with people that are new, and also to have social skills, and want to know how to talk with myself. That was Maria. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing. And feel free to continue typing in the chat. It would be great to learn why people have joined this session, because I can cater what I'm talking to what you're actually looking to get out of this session. And in fact, I heard at least 2 people talking about wanting to practice their communication skills and wanting to learn more about networking as a means of benefiting their business or furthering their career. And that actually brings me to a thought that I had about my own communications career and my own communications path. I didn't start out knowing that I wanted to be a communications professional. I went into university knowing that I had some communication skills. I always did pretty well in English. I liked drama, not drama as in like things happening around me. I liked acting in plays. And I enjoyed having the opportunity to share my ideas. But like in all honesty, I was a pretty shy student. Whether it was through elementary school, high school, university, I was pretty shy. And going into university, recognizing that I was good in communications, I decided just to try different things out. So I tried the radio, I tried the student paper, I tried working with the university health center to be a health promoter. So I tried all different styles of communication. And doing all that stuff didn't make me any less shy. So I figured I need to kind of just like break myself out of this shell. And I just started volunteering like crazy. Like I started volunteering for film festivals, for the jazz festival. I volunteered with the World Short Film Festival. I became a publicist, a volunteer publicist for the Mississauga Film Festival. And it just was about meeting people and starting to learn how different people interact. And I think like pushing yourself into those situations where you're just meeting a ton of different people, and frankly, you don't have any choice but to interact with them, helps you to learn things about yourself. For me, it showed me that I needed to be a little bit more expressive in how I communicate. I was pretty just dead tone, and I wouldn't express myself. I wouldn't emote a lot when I was communicating. That I needed to ask more questions that when I was communicating, that would help to facilitate more conversation. But all that being said, take any opportunity that you can to practice your communications. That's going to be the best way to improve your communication skills. Sessions like this are great because it gives you tips to kind of walk away with, but nothing replaces just practicing. So kind of diving into it, why is this training important? Why is interpersonal communications important? So for today, what I'm hoping is that we can create some a strong foundation in some of the principles of interpersonal communication. What does interpersonal communication even mean? And just understanding how it impacts us in our everyday life. Developing a lens for effective interpersonal communications and how it can benefit you. So creating that understanding of like not just what interpersonal communication is, but how it can benefit you so you know how to best use it. And integrate that awareness and develop an ability to apply the tools to the work that we do. If we were doing this session in person, there would be more exercises that we can do together. It's a little bit harder over Zoom, so we'll keep this to more of a conversation and maybe have some, one-on-one conversations inside of this group context. But my hope is that you walk away with some of these skills at the end of this session. So what is interpersonal communications? I always like to start with definitions, making sure that we're all kind of on the same page as it relates to interpersonal communications. I never assume that I know the definitions of anything. So whenever I dive into these topics, I start with the dictionary. And communications is the imparting or exchanging of information or news. And interpersonal is relating to relationships or communication between people. So when we put that together, interpersonal communications is the process of exchanging information, ideas, and feelings between two or more people through verbal and nonverbal methods. And I think there's a couple of key points to highlight here when we talk about interpersonal communications. Number one is it's an exchange of information. A lot of the time when people think of communication, they're thinking of the output part of communication. They're thinking of how am I speaking? How am I writing? What people aren't considering as closely is the input. Like, what am I listening to? What information am I taking in? And effective communication is all about speaking and responding. It's about observing and responding. It's about recognizing the environment you're in, taking in those inputs, and then responding based on that environment. It's the quality of the output based on what's coming into you. It's ideas and feelings between two or more people, but it's also verbal and nonverbal. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the presentation. But when we say the verbal communication, I think that's pretty obvious. It's kind of what's coming out of your mouth. The nonverbal is how is it coming out of your mouth? How are you communicating? Like, as you can see, maybe not as clearly because we're on camera, I'm communicating a lot with my hands. I'm communicating with my eyes. I'm communicating, with my body language and kind of moving. There's a lot of things that we do that is nonverbal that really indicates to a person what we're trying to communicate. Can you give me some more examples of nonverbal communication? And again, feel free to type it in the chat, but also you're welcome to unmute yourself and just share. What are some nonverbal communication tools that we have available to us as people.
So Christopher, I'll jump in and start. I'll break the ice a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was always told growing up is when people are speaking to you, don't stand with your arms crossed.
Yep.
Because that makes it look as though you are either angry or you're closed off to taking in new information.
Yeah. Body language plays a huge part. Thanks, Stephanie. Like standing open to someone versus standing, with your arms crossed like this, talking to someone. I see some other answers in the chat. Nodding to a customer waiting in line is nonverbal. Yeah, it shows that you're listening to them, that you're taking in that information. Eye contact, smiling, Ned Hod's eye contact. What else? What are some other nonverbal communication methods?
How about your hand placement, like when you're speaking? I'm gonna actually turn on my camera. I have a tendency to do this, and I always get feedback saying that I look bored, as opposed to placing my hand under my chin, which says that I look engaged.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, this communicates something very different than this. Communicates something very different than this. Like it's all nonverbal. Like I don't know if anybody who here, and by a show of hands, who here is interested in politics like at all. And I would not be offended if no hands go up. Like this is just a general question. I see Grace is interested in politics. I see Belendre. And feel free to correct me if I mispronounce your name, is interested in politics. So not a lot of people who are interested in politics. That's completely fine. Folks who are really deeply interested in politics, perhaps you know how much media training these folks have to do, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever watched a debate, especially in Canadian politics, where they never point, right? They never point at the camera, they never point at people because that's seen as aggressive. In fact, a lot of the time they'll do like open hands like this. And it's like different small things like that. Like what kind of tie are they wearing? Like how are they placing their hands? The kind of tone they're using. Like these are all subtle cues that are important in the context of a political campaign, especially because they have to essentially get voters to know who they are in a very short span of time. And most voters are not remembering the verbal things. They're remembering the nonverbal things. It's the nonverbal things that really leave an impression on people. The verbal things are the information that requires actual thoughts to process. The nonverbal is all emotional. It's how does that person make me feel? And what do you think is more memorable? The thinking pieces or the emotional pieces? And you can just type that in the chat as well. Who thinks it's thinking and who thinks it's emotional? What makes more of an impact? I see emotional, thinking, the feeling. Emotional. Yeah, because you think before you react. Exactly. Right? It's playing to the part of your brain that acts first. It's not that the thinking is not important. It's just not what is triggered first. And as a result, it's not what's left with you in the most long-lasting way. I even bring the example of a car commercial or a phone ad. A car commercial is rarely talking to you about all of the features of the car, that it has this kind of horsepower or this kind of interior or blah, blah, blah. Car commercials are all about the feeling. It's all about driving through the mountain. It's all about the kind of person you can be by owning this vehicle. Same thing with the phone commercial, any sort of technology commercial. It's the kind of person you get to be. It's the experience of owning this. Try to remember that when it comes to interpersonal communication. Like, it doesn't matter how good your words are if your delivery is terrible. It doesn't matter how good your words are if you look completely disengaged, right? So you need to really pay attention to how are you presenting that information, not just the information that you're giving. When it comes to interpersonal communication, I like to think about the different people, and I like to think about how impactful communication can be. And One of the biggest examples for me, and something I bring up inside of whether you're talking about PR school or business owners, I like to bring up the example of Alexander Hamilton just to show how effective communications can be. Again, show of hands, who knows who Alexander Hamilton is? I know we're not in the United States, but I see one hand coming up. Grace is on fire tonight. Me and Grace are on the same page here. Okay, cool. So Alexander Hamilton is one of the founding fathers of the United States. And he was actually the one of the main writers of the Federalist Papers that were a series of 85 essays that went on to become part of the US Constitution or form the foundation for the US Constitution. Alexander Hamilton is relevant for me as it relates to interpersonal communication because that's what he did. He was all about building relationships with people, communicating ideas. His delivery was at times crass, but he was passionate and he knew how to use communications to build relationships with people and essentially to build a nation. Like communications can have a huge impact. It seems like a trivial thing sometimes, but communications really is the foundation for literally our countries, like whether you're talking about Canada or the United States. And speaking about Canada, we talk about the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, the CBC. The CBC was actually proposed by the Royal Commission on Radio Broadcasting to connect people across nations to reinforce the sense of a Canadian identity. There was a worry about communications coming from the United States and enforcing a United States identity on Canada, that we wouldn't form our own unique identity because communications has an opportunity or an ability to influence how people think and how they act, right? Recognizing this, the Canadian government created the CBC so that they could have an influence on how we as a country would form our culture, our personalities. This is just talking about the importance of communications generally. When we talk about interpersonal communication specifically, there are three pieces to it from my perspective. There's explicit, implicit, and then there's active listening. Like I mentioned, communications is an exchange of information. So yes, that top half is all about how communications is getting out there. And then the bottom half is about how communication is coming in. What do you notice about this simple graphic? What do folks notice about this simple graphic? Yeah, I see Grace responded there. I see Shane, you unmuted yourself. Shane, did you have a similar answer?
Yeah, active listening is accounted for in the largest portion, while the explicit section is really in the smallest, on the smallest scale.
Exactly, 100%. I think it's pretty clear even in a simple graphic like this, but why do you think active listening is so important? Like we're going to dive into it a little bit more, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Go ahead, Grace.
The reason why, oh, sorry, could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. The reason why active listening is more important than the other areas because the main basis of a conversation is someone listening to you. When you're actively speaking out to someone and they're just like, looking away, looking on their phone, typing all the time, there's no conversation. It's
Yeah,
like a word to a brick conversation. That's the only way I can explain it.
totally. Yeah, totally. That resonates with me entirely. Like active listening plays such a large part in communication because it's a form of communication itself. How you listen to someone indicates to someone the importance you place on what they're saying. Like it's a communication. Active listening is actually a form of implicit communication. It's saying what you're saying is important and I want to hear everything. What else? Go ahead, Shane.
So yeah, I can fondly remember reading a book by, I think it was Dale Carnegie, about, and one of the call to actions he said was you can learn more about someone by becoming genuine. You can make more friends by becoming genuinely interested in others than you can in about 2 months in getting persons to be interested in you, which highlights the importance of actually, in order for you to show an interest in what someone is saying, you require that active listening piece of it
Yeah,
to then show that they're actually, what they're saying is actually of importance to you, and it helps to let them feel in the same way that, hey, I'm appreciated, or
totally. Alandre, I see you unmuted yourself.
Yes. So what I would like to say is like, what I notice in myself is that sometimes when I'm having a conversation with someone, like I do the body language and I am really interested in listening to the person, but then I find myself like cutting them off. And not because I'm trying to be rude or anything, it just the thought comes to my head now. And
Yeah.
if I don't say it, I forget by the time they finish talking. And
Mhm.
I've been trying a lot. Like I'm a lot better than before, but that's something that I've struggled with. It's like, how do I stop myself from cutting and fully listen, and then like rephrasing if I need to, like it's been a struggle.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I'm sure a lot of people have that same sort of struggle of kind of wanting to get thoughts out there and engage in the conversation because you have ideas as well, but not wanting to cut the person off, not wanting to prevent them from sharing their own ideas. Stephanie, I see you unmuted yourself as well.
Yes, I did. When we're speaking about active listening, one of the first requests I made when I came on was for people to turn on their cameras.
Mhm.
We're in a day and age that has shifted from all in person to predominantly virtual now. And it becomes that much more difficult when communicating when all you have is a name on a black screen.
100%.
And
Yeah.
then a tip for I'm gonna butcher your name again. I'm sorry, Valandre. Is that okay? Passable? I do the same thing all the time, and I've made it a habit to always walk with a pen and paper.
Mm.
So I'm able to listen, take notes, and then address my my questions afterwards.
Yeah. That's a really, really good tip.
Thank
Book?
you.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I think like active listening is important because in a way, like you are thinking about your response in a way, but you're preparing yourself for I guess like the tone. I've had some people who like give their responses to something that we're having a conversation about, and it's either has nothing to do with the conversation or
Yeah.
they react in a completely different tone, and it kind of throws the balance off. But
Mhm.
yeah, active listening helps with tone and I guess preparing yourself for the response.
Totally. Thanks, Book. That's really helpful. And I've also been in that situation of folks who I'm just like, what question are you responding to? I don't, I think we're having two different conversations here, and I was not included in that conversation because I'm not sure where you're going there. But specifically, when we take a look at this graphic, and thanks everybody, that those were all great contributions, and I think point to the importance of active listening and why it's the largest part of this graphic. If we were to break it down by percentages, explicit communication is about 20%. Like that's the words, literally the words that you're using, the words that are coming out of your mouth. Implicit communications, how you are communicating those words, makes up about 30%. It's of greater importance, but pretty close to, right? Like you can communicate that things very nicely, but if you're not saying nothing at all, if you're saying nothing at all, then it's not going to leave people with the best impression. Like there's a balance that you have to strike between finding the right words and how to say those words. Active listening lets you know how to use those tools that are available to you. You can think of explicit and implicit communication as your kind of output, and the active listening as your input. It's the information that you're gathering to know how to use your explicit and implicit communication. And that's why it's important, because your communication is only as valuable as the information that you're taking in to give that communication. If someone is deeply engaged, then you go into a longer explanation. If someone is not as deeply engaged, but you still need to get the information out there, you be short and succinct, right? You only are able to know that through active listening skills. It's like that person, and I'm sure everyone has experienced this, who uses a bunch of big and fancy words, who is so verbose, who is clearly intelligent and wants everyone to know it. But then you have a conversation with them and you're not taking in anything that they're saying. You're not remembering anything that they're saying because they're speaking too long. You don't think they're interested in you, so you have no interest in remembering what they're saying. Does that resonate with folks? Has everyone had that kind of experience speaking with that kind of person who clearly has all the right words but is not interested at all in you? That is not effective communications. It's not to say that that person will be unsuccessful, but in terms of their ability to build relationships, it will be hindered. And the kinds of relationships that they build will likely be a lot more transactional rather than those kind of deep, long-lasting relationships, right? And if you want to build those deep relationships that are going to get you far, active listening is part of that that recipe. So, starting with explicit communications, here are some things to consider. Number one, what are the words that you're using? As a communications professional, obviously, I think about words a lot. We think about words from an accessibility perspective. We think about words from an appropriateness perspective. I work in a healthcare environment, so we have to think about words from that perspective. We think about words from an equity perspective. Things like using folks rather than using boys and girls. It's kind of the small things that make a difference. But it makes a difference at the end of the day when it comes to communicating, whether it's writing an email or communicating between you and I. How I would communicate and the words I would use are different in this environment than they would be in a healthcare environment when I'm at a conference, right? And it's because the audience that I'm speaking to is different. So and that's one thing to bear in mind. Explicit communications, are they the words that you're using right for the environment? Like I mentioned, working in a healthcare environment, the kinds of words I would use are different than an environment where I'm not sure who I'm speaking to. So I may use different words here than I would there or that I would in an education environment. Can you say more with less? I think for all communications, the ability to edit down is a skill. And it takes a lot of time, right? And it may not seem like that way at first, but to write a 2-page letter is not a difficult thing when you really get into it. To take that same 2-page letter and condense it to 1 page, but still have the same impact, you're going to actually have a more impactful communication if you're able to bring it in, to rein it in, to get all those key points across, but with less words. And it's because people's attention spans are short, but also because you're getting straight to the point. You're getting to the heart of the message and not including all the filler. And silence is communications as well. Again, getting back to this point of active listening, using your words effectively means also knowing when to stop using those words, when to take a pause and to let someone else speak. When we talk about implicit communications, there are a few things to consider. There's tone and intonation. So, I mean, I think this is pretty obvious what I mean by tone and intonation, but it's how you're saying those words. Like when I say hi versus saying hi versus saying hey, like it's 3 different kinds of communication. It's the same words, same meaning if you take the definition of each word, but the intonation makes a huge difference. You know, like when someone says, "I'm so excited to see you," versus, "Oh, I'm excited to see you." You know, it's the difference between sounding sincere versus sounding actually excited. So it's whether you're casual, formal, are you friendly, are you being short and hostile with people? It's are the emotions on the inside showing on the outside? You may be feeling a certain way today, like whether it's tired or frustrated. Is that coming out in your communication unintentionally? Because that tone will set the tone for the entire interaction. The tone of your voice will set the tone of your interaction. So it behooves you to really pay attention to how you're using your voice and using your voice effectively so that you can set the kind of environment that you want to establish for the interaction that you're having with folks. Frequency of communication. This is an interesting one because it doesn't necessarily deal with my communication with you in a moment. It deals with communication over time. And communication over time, like it actually means something, right? Is your interaction with someone purely transactional? Am I just messaging them when I want something? Or am I messaging them on an ongoing basis? Is this a business relationship? Is this a friendship? Is this casual? When we're talking about business relationships, what are you communicating with them as you communicate that frequency? Is it just, can you purchase something from me? Or are you also sharing something of value? One story that I can share in this regards actually is before I had a communications business, when I was still a student at Seneca College, I formed a relationship with a director at an investor relations firm. At the time, I was interested in communications and financial communications specifically. And I formed this relationship with this director. She came in for a presentation one day and we really kind of hit it off and formed a friendship. And I would make it a point that every couple of months, every 4 or 5 months, I would just drop her a line and say, hey, how's it going? And that small piece of interaction led me to having at least 3 interviews with this investor relations firm. And it wasn't anything. I was never actually asking for an interview, but actually just making that effort to keep in touch on an ongoing basis led to opportunities. And I had similar opportunities actually with my professor at Seneca College. He was our professor in Public Relations 101. And I made an effort, again, every couple of months just to drop him a line. Jeff Roach, who, sadly, passed away a few months ago. But every couple of months, I would just drop him a line and say, hey. And every once in a while, at least once a year, we would go out for a beer just to catch up. And I think it was about 8 years after graduating that an opportunity came up to become a sessional professor at Seneca College. And because we had these interactions and he actually just brought it up over a beer and said, hey, actually one of my professors, he quit on me. And I'm wondering if you'd be able to take over for this semester for an internal communications course. And I was like, sure, actually, I have some space and some time and I would love to take on that opportunity. There's a lot of value in forming communications with people, not just in the moment, but over time. And the frequency of your communication, it indicates something. It indicates that you're actually interested in forming a relationship, in building something. Oh, Carrie left, I see. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm gonna jump in here quickly. A quick exercise for active communication. Everybody can send me a message, a direct message, not to everyone, your full name and your email address in the next 3 minutes, and I will be emailing you a treat.
Oh.
So there's our exercise in active communication.
Our exercise in active listening. Are you actually paying attention is what?
Absolutely. So we have 3 minutes at 6:53. All the emails, address, and full name that I've received by 6:56. I will be sending you something in your inbox.
All right. Good plug.
Ooh, they're coming in.
Okay, people are listening. That's
They're
good.
listening.
Right. So the frequency of your communication, don't expect to build a relationship in the first message is what I'm trying to say here. When you're reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, if you are sending a request for something in your first message without trying to build that relationship, i.e., can you give me a job? It's going to communicate something. It's going to communicate that maybe you're not professional. It's going to communicate that you just want something from this person, that you're not interested in building a relationship, versus, hey, I'd like to learn something about you. Would you be open to a 20-minute conversation? No ask for a job, no nothing like that. And they may not be available. But what would it look like if, like, down the line again, you message them and, hey, I thought this would be interesting. I know you work in, this environment. I just thought this would be interesting for you. Again, it's coming back to that active listening, looking at what they're interested in and interacting with them on that basis. The last thing I will say is about this piece of frequency of communication, especially for those folks who are looking to build a business. When I first started Trotman Communications, I did not have a website. I did not have a flyer. All I had was an email. I wanted to get up and going relatively quickly. So I thought the best way for me to do that was just to get interested in my potential clients. And I had decided for myself that I wanted to work with community health centers. So I wrote an email, just kind of putting it all out there that, hey, my name is Christopher Trotman. I'm looking to start a communications agency that supports community health centers. And I want to learn more about what your pain points are as an executive director. Would you be open to having a 20-minute conversation with me? That was it. I was upfront with them. Clearly, I'm trying to start a business, but I wasn't trying to sell them anything. Because for me, I was genuinely interested in what are your pain points, because I wanted to know, like, what should my services be? And within the first month, I was able to get my first 2 clients from those initial conversations. And all I did was literally just create a list of all the community health centers in Toronto, emailed them all with essentially the same message. And the success rate doesn't have to be high inside of getting those introductions. If I'm emailing, 70 community health centers and only 10% of them are getting back to me, that's still 7 quality conversations I have with potential clients. And it's that sort of interaction that makes a difference. And I'll build on that by saying that one of the clients I had recently, Regent Park Community Health Center, was a client that I got after messaging them frequently, like on a regular basis, every couple of months for about 3 years. And it led to a great contract with them, doing a communications plan. And I just kept coming back because I was genuinely interested in working with this organization. So all of that to say, like, the frequency of your communication communicates something. It's all part of effective communications. And then the presentation, of course. There are different things that you want to consider in terms of your personal presentation. We talked a little bit about it when we started getting into implicit communications. It's like, where is your hand placement? Are you closed off, or are you standing open to the information that's coming to you? It's the facial expressions, like, pay attention to your face, fix your face, because that makes a difference. Being mindful of what your face is doing. And frankly, I'm not always the best at that. I sometimes unintentionally communicate what's inside my head on my face. So it's something to be careful of. But it's also your clothing, like having your own personal style for sure. But whatever that style is, just make sure it's tight, it's professional, it's clean, So these are all bits and pieces of your personal presentation. There's also how you present the information in your communication from a written perspective. Are you using the correct punctuation, your grammar? Like, are you inside of a PowerPoint presentation? Are you using good style techniques? Like, there's all of these pieces around how you're presenting the information that support what you're communicating. And then there's active listening. And really, when you think about active listening, it's more than just paying attention to what a person is saying. There are actually steps that you can take to listen more effectively. And paying attention is the first step. It's literally just listening to what that person is saying, kind of trying to quiet the thoughts in your own head and really taking in what that person is saying. Number 2 is withholding judgment. And this part is critical because there's a lot of misunderstanding that happens inside of communication. And that misunderstanding comes from our own histories and our own backgrounds. We may think that someone is saying something that they're not actually saying. Because we're prejudging what they're saying based on how they're dressed, based on how they're saying it, based on our history with them. If we can take a step back and withhold judgment, we can fully hear what someone is trying to say, because we're not putting our own judgment in the way of those words. And it helps to support active listening. Number 3 is reflect. So as they're saying the words, think about it. Like, don't just like passively listen to what they're saying, have it come, like they say, in one ear and out the other. If it helps, actually repeat back in your head what they're saying. And as you're repeating back in their head what they're saying, ask yourself the question, does this make sense? Do I fully understand what they're saying? And if need be, actually pause them to clarify. Hey, you said this one thing, and I actually just want to pause you for a second. Can you say more about that? Can you explain? Right? Which is much different than pausing them to interject with your own thoughts. It's showing interest in what they're saying. It's showing that you're actively listening to everything they're saying and you're trying to gain that understanding. And then number 5, summarize. Right? It's the same that when you're in school, taking notes as you are listening to the teacher. One way to take notes, even if you don't have a notepad, is to summarize what they're saying, but in your own words. And it helps to confirm your understanding of what they're saying. So if someone tells me, I had a great day today, I may say back to them, I heard that you had a great day. That's awesome, right? It helps me to remember what they're saying because I'm repeating back to them in my own words. And it helps them to see that I'm actually listening, and gives them an opportunity to confirm my understanding. And when you do that, it also invites them to ask about what you're thinking, what your thoughts are. It opens the doorway to more communication. And lastly, share. After you summarize, after you confirm your understanding, and after you show that you are appreciating what they're saying, share your own thoughts, share your own experiences. That's also part of active listening, but only after all of these steps. After taking in all of the information, it's actually communicating back to them. It's now the output, sharing to them your thoughts around what they said is part of active listening as well, right? So, like I mentioned, this is a short presentation. These are all, from my perspective, important pieces to effective communications, and specifically interpersonal communications. But what I want to do now is just open the floor to a discussion about interpersonal communications. Like I mentioned, I am a communications professional that has my own communications firm. I've been a coach in the past, supporting people with their communications. I've been a teacher. So if you have specific communication challenges that you'd like to bring to the table, I would love the opportunity to contribute to you and speak to you about those communication challenges. And in doing so, maybe contribute to everyone else around the table as well. So, thank you for your time and your attention, and just want to see if anyone has any questions.
Hi, hello. I have a question here.
Please go ahead.
I joined a bit late, so I apologize about that. But from what I heard so far, very clear and concise presentation, and I got a lot of value from what I heard of. I just wanted to kind of put some input. In my previous role, I did presentations and whatnot, and like talking like this, I'm fine. But I find like in front of people, like my voice kind of cracks and I kind of get nervous. Any way to any advice you would have for me to kind of overcome that?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, there's 3 key things that have helped me, because I also was not always the best at giving presentations. And number 1 is to slow down, and almost kind of like force yourself to slow down. A lot of the time, the cracking happens because we're speaking too quickly or because we're nervous. Slowing down helps to, number 1, slow down your heart rate. And number 2, it helps to slow down your mind. If you slow down your speaking. So whatever speed you're speaking at, consciously think, I need to speak at half the speed, which sounds very slow, but you're probably speaking very quickly. So when you speak at half the speed, you'll be speaking just at a normal speed. And for the longest time, that's what I had to remind myself, just speak at half the speed. And immediately that had an impact because it calmed me down, it slowed me down, it gave me confidence because to speak at half the speed, you have to have confidence in what you're saying. And the confidence to not just kind of rush through it, right? Number two is just practice the presentation and make good notes. The more prepared you are, the less likely you are to kind of get nervous and have your voice crack. And also not to make a big deal of your voice cracking, kind of just roll with the punches, you know? Even make a joke about it if that makes you, if you're comfortable doing that, because the more confident you are, the less likely you are to experience that sort of thing. And the last thing is just to practice. Like I work with a person who is part of Toastmasters, which is a great organization that gives people practice with public speaking. Certainly you could do something like that, which is a more structured format, but also just trying to find more opportunities for public speaking so that you can get that practice in. That's going to be the biggest thing that will give you the confidence and will help to prevent you from, you know, kind of messing up in ways that kind of disappoint you.
Right. Appreciate that. And this is recorded, right? I want to go back and watch what I missed. Is that possible?
I believe I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
right
it's
on.
recorded and it will be posted on the BBPA's YouTube page in approximately a week.
Perfect. Thank you. Cheers.
Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, Christopher. So from what I understand in what you explained just now, confidence plays an important role in effectively communicating and especially when presenting. Now, I'm at a bit of a conflict, right? So since being here in Canada, I've often heard about understanding Canadian workplace culture, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of that goes into how is it you present yourself, as oftentimes I've heard that showing too much of a confidence, they may perceive it as a bit of being arrogant or in the wrong way when Canadians are a bit more reserved and laid back. So how do you find that fine line between one, being confident, but not coming across as being perceived in the wrong way?
Yeah, no, and that's fair enough. And I think it kind of goes back to something that we were speaking about a little bit earlier. It depends on what your view of confidence is, right? For me, confidence is the small things, like speaking slowly, not feeling the need to rush through my thoughts, and speaking clearly, like not having questions in my voice as I'm speaking to someone. It comes in my tone and intonation. For some, confidence looks like speaking a lot or speaking loudly, or speaking about themselves, right? Um, I think confidence can come in many forms, and there are some forms of confidence that can be off-putting. And where there are other forms of confidence that just shows that I'm comfortable in kind of who I am and what I know and the abilities that I bring to the table. So for you, what I would say is it's finding that balance of recognizing what does confidence look like in this context, right? And taking on those lessons and practicing speaking with like intention, speaking, like I said, more slowly without the kind of questions in your voice, like sharing your knowledge, but also asking a lot of questions, right? And recognizing that part of confidence is, you know, not being afraid to look a certain way. Some people don't ask questions because they don't want to look silly or they don't want to look foolish. Whereas confidence is like being able to come up to someone is like, actually, I don't know the answer to this. Are you able to help me? Right? I think that's also a very confident thing to do. So I think it's kind of shifting the perspective of what confidence looks like for you, and recognizing that there are different forms of confidence. It's not all about kind of what can be perceived as arrogant. It's also just about presenting yourself comfortably.
Understood. Understood. Thank you.
Sure. Belandre.
So thank you so much, Christopher, for today. Like I learned a lot. Like two things that I find that I struggle with it. One is eye contact. Like coming from Haiti, like it's more like a cultural thing. Because in Haiti, looking at someone like especially an older person talking to you in the eyes mean disrespect. But in here, if you don't do it, then the person think like either you're not engaged or you're lying. And I've been having that struggle since I came here to Canada. Like it has gotten a lot better, but I still find that I struggle with that. So I was gonna ask like, what are your like tips on that? And another thing is like, you probably noticed I a lot. Um,
Yeah.
so that's, yeah. Mhm. So I kind of need help with that.
Yeah. No, for sure.
And the more I think of my humming, like through a conversation, because sometimes it's like, oh, Val, you humming too much. And then that's when I hum more, like trying to fix it in the middle of the conversation, things like that. So what are your points on
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And I'm sure that other people resonate. And thank you everyone for sharing tonight. I think everybody, yeah, not everybody, but I know there are folks that likely resonate with the things that you're sharing. And by being vulnerable and sharing your own thoughts and your own challenges, you're helping other people in the chat who may be taking something away as well. So thank you. I just said as well. I think it's I'm going to go back to my one tip that I've shared, I think multiple times. It's having the confidence to slow down. Like is a filler. Like I have fillers as well. Like I haven't completely eliminated fillers from my speaking, nor do I really intend to. I don't know that fillers are necessarily always a bad thing. Excessively, it can show that you're not confident in what you're saying. It can be distracting. But every once in a while, saying a like or an it's not the biggest deal in the world. So what I would say is number one, just slow down in your speaking. When you slow down, the need to have those fillers is reduced because you're not trying to fill in space. You're giving yourself time to think about what is your next word. And the next word will more than likely not be because you're actually giving yourself time to think about what should the next word be. But also just taking time to reflect and think about what is the reason why I use and are there words that I could use to replace or what would it look like every time I have a thought to use the word to just pause. And that's something I did for a long time as well, because I used to have a lot of fillers in my speaking. And every time I would have the thought of using I started training myself to just pause. And at first it sounded kind of awkward. I would start talking and then I would pause for a second. Then I would start talking and I would pause for a second. At least it felt awkward to me. But on the outside, it just looked like I was speaking with intention, right? I'm talking, pausing, talking, pausing for a second. So I think not being afraid of the silence and just taking your time to speak. And as it relates to the eye contact, honestly, my best advice is just practice. What I mentioned for myself is that I volunteered a lot. And I think that was a great opportunity to just interact with a ton of different people and get practice in with speaking with a ton of different people, but also practice in communication techniques like strong eye contact, maintaining conversation, active listening, all of those pieces. It's all just practice. And you can try also just like looking maybe like right here or like below or on the forehead rather than directly in someone's eye. It's also a great way to kind of get around the nervousness or the kind of experience of this is not comfortable for me by looking at their face, but not directly in the eyes.
that? Thank you so much.
I'm gonna just jump in quickly for those of you who responded. If you check your emails, you should see something in there. These programs are supported by Starbucks Canada. and they have generously donated gift cards. So those of you who responded will have a
Hmm.
virtual Starbucks gift card in your inbox.
Amazing. Thanks, Stephanie.
You didn't respond.
I was facilitating.
Active listening, Christopher.
Oh my
I
goodness.
did say you were excluded.
Well, here we are. Anyways, does anyone else have any questions? A book. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Sorry, say that again.
Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, say the name again. Sorry, I didn't hear you pronounce it.
Oh no, active listening. I said a book.
No, a book.
A book. A book.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Sorry. I guess what are your tips for like summarizing or like communicating your ideas in a more concise way? I'm an emerging artist, so I do look for like art grants or like art funding opportunities. And of course, like I'm very passionate about my work, so it can be a lot of like rambling on and
Yeah.
certain guidelines that they're looking for.
Yeah.
So I guess like what tips do you have to like communicate those ideas in a more concise and like short form way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, good question. And I can speak directly to grant writing, because it's part of what I do as a communications professional. But I can also speak more generally to making your ideas a little more succinct and communicating a little bit more clearly. So to that point, start with your intention. Like recognize what is the intention of the communication and what are you trying to have someone take away from what you're communicating to them, right? So when it comes to anything I'm writing, whether it's an annual report or a grant or a letter, I start with what is the intention of this communication? What am I trying to have them receive from what I'm writing to them? And in the grant, it may be that you're trying to, like, the intention is pretty clear because they're asking very direct questions. But even inside of those questions, you may want to just create bullet points for yourself to say, I want to communicate that I am this, this, and this. And then just start writing, right? You know, write as long as you need to get all of your ideas out of your head. Then go back to the intention and start cutting out everything that doesn't speak directly to that intention, right? And start kind of carving out all of the pieces and looking at what can I do to get to the point more quickly. And for me, that's the biggest key, and just recognizing what is the intention of my communication and then cutting out everything that doesn't serve that intention, right? Because there's additional information that you can add inside of basically any communication, but often that starts to detract from the key point that you're trying to make, where it's kind of, if you're looking at a more, scholarly communication structure, it's kind of like, what is your hypothesis, or what is like the proof point one, proof point two, proof point three, what is the conclusion? I often communicate in points of three or points of five, because for me, again, that's just ways to make my communication a bit more succinct. So I start with, what is the intention, point one, point two, point three. Anything more than that, I need to just start like culling it down. I don't need to try and convince them, right? It's more so presenting the information that's there and presenting it like, oh, this is obvious, right? This is the hypothesis. I am great. Here's point one. Here's point two. Here's point three. In conclusion, I am great. So I think like starting from the intention and using a structure where you are clearly communicating, starting with the question and laying out your proof points, and then having a very short conclusion.
Okay. Okay. And then also, I guess
Oh,
Is it
sorry. One other thing before apologies.
Sure.
I'll cut you off briefly just because one thing I see a lot with people who are writing grants is they don't end up answering the question, right? And it seems pretty obvious, but after you write your answer, go back to the question in the grant and ask, did I actually answer this question? Number one, did I include words from the question in my answer? And number two, can I honestly say I've answered their direct question? I can't, and this is not just, from an arts perspective or small creators. Like I've worked with healthcare organizations with people who have master's degrees and PhDs, and I see the grants that they write. I'm like, you haven't answered the question though, right? So it's more of a human thing than it is a, skills thing necessarily. We'd like to explain and in some cases over explain. So the last thing I would mention as it relates to grant specifically, actually go back to the grant and ask yourself, did I answer this question?
okay? Okay, yeah, yeah, you answered my second question. Okay,
Oh.
perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm gonna jump in on this because Christopher knows when it comes to grants, I can't not talk.
Yeah.
One of the things that I tend to do, because I do a lot of grant writing myself, I have two different approaches. So when I read the question, I will respond in bullet forms and then create them into sentences. So that way it's very succinct and it's only answering what is required. The other thing I do is I often use proofreaders. My mother she is amazing when it comes to the English language. So I will give her the responses and not the questions and ask her, what question do you think I was answering when you read this response? So you have a top down and a bottom up approach that way to ensure that you are encapsulating the essence of what was asked.
That's a really good point.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we're down to the last couple minutes. I'm actually really pleased with how this session has gone. An hour and a half can feel like a long time until you get started, and it goes very quickly. So if there's any final questions, I would strongly suggest that you ask them now. And if not, then Christopher, I'll give you an opportunity to wrap up.
Awesome. Okay. Well, with no questions being seen in the chat or folks putting up their hands, just like to take an opportunity to thank everyone for your time and your attention. I know it's not always the easiest thing to find time in the evening, especially after work. You have dinner to get to or other obligations. So I appreciate you all taking this time to look to improve your own interpersonal communications and hear from me in that respect. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. You can find me Christopher Trotman, or I can also leave my email in the chat if you want to reach out if you have any other questions. I'm always happy to have a conversation. And if there's nothing else, then have a good evening. It was great chatting with all of you. Thanks so much.